He had been training in that same old Las Vegas gym for years, a place filled with echoes of punches, sweat, and memories of the man he used to be. The morning started like any other, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic squeak of boxing shoes on canvas, the soft thud of gloves hitting the heavy bag. But there was something in his movements that day, something off, something quietly alarming. His punches weren't landing with the same force. His breathing was uneven. His shoulders hung lower than usual, as if he were carrying a weight no one else could see. A trainer watching from the corner noticed the tremble in his hands, the unfocused stare between rounds, the way he sat on the stool longer than he normally would. Tyson brushed it off, insisting he was fine, insisting he just needed a minute. But minutes turned into moments that felt wrong, dangerously wrong. Then it happened. He threw a punch, staggered, and suddenly the entire gym fell silent as his knees buckled beneath him. His gloves dropped first, hitting the floor with a dull thump, followed by his body collapsing against the ropes. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze everyone in place. For a split second, he tried to stand, gripping the ropes with shaking fingers, but his legs refused to hold him. Witnesses said they saw fear in his eyes, real fear, the kind you only see in someone who knows something inside their body has crossed a line. Trainers rushed toward him, calling his name, but his voice came out in a broken whisper. "Something's wrong. I can't feel right." Those words sent a shock through the room. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't dehydration. This wasn't age catching up in a gentle, predictable way. This was something deeper, darker, and far more threatening. As they helped him to the bench, he pressed a hand to his chest, blinking slowly, his breathing uneven, his face pale. He tried to joke, tried to smile, but the pain in his expression made it clear he was fighting something he could no longer hide. That collapse exposed the truth he had been ignoring for years. The nights he woke up gasping, the aches that lingered longer than they should, the flashes of dizziness he dismissed as nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was everything, and as the gym staff called for help, the world outside had no idea that inside that quiet room, one of the strongest men to ever walk the earth had finally reached a breaking point he could no longer outfight. For most of his life, he moved through the world like a storm, unstoppable, fearless, unbreakable. But what the public never saw was the fear he carried deep inside, a fear older than his fame, older than his success, older even than the fights that built his legend. It was a fear born in the cold hallways of his childhood, when survival meant hardening his heart and shutting down his tears. As a boy, he learned to fight because he was terrified, terrified of being hurt, terrified of being abandoned, terrified of being powerless. And even now, decades later, with millions of fans and a name known around the world, that fear still followed him like a shadow he could never outrun. It lived inside him silently, showing up in the quiet hours of the night when memories returned uninvited. Memories of being bullied, robbed, pushed around, left alone. Memories of sleeping in abandoned buildings. Memories of losing people he loved without warning. Memories of fists, of hunger, of helplessness. People saw a champion, but he saw the little boy he once was. Scared, unprotected, unheard. The world saw a monster in the ring, but inside, he saw someone desperate for safety, desperate to be loved, desperate to escape the chaos that shaped his soul. That fear followed him into adulthood. It followed him into fame. It followed him into the darkest mistakes of his life. It whispered to him in hotel rooms after victories, reminding him that no matter how many opponents he knocked out, he could never knock out the pain inside his own mind. In interviews, he tried to joke about it, tried to hide it behind laughter, tried to bury it beneath bravado. But when he was alone, when the cameras disappeared and the world grew quiet, he felt it clawing at him, that same childhood terror rising from a place he didn't know how to heal. It became worse as he grew older. Rage turned into exhaustion. Violence turned into vulnerability. The nightmares came back. The memories grew sharper. The truth grew louder. And one night, sitting in the dark of his home, he finally said it out loud to someone he trusted. "I've been scared my whole life." Those words changed everything. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind strength. He wasn't hiding behind glory. He wasn't hiding behind the reputation that once made him feel safe. He was admitting the secret he had carried for decades. The fear that built the fighter, the fear that shaped the legend, the fear that never left him, even after he conquered the world. And that confession became the key to understanding the tragedy unfolding inside him. A tragedy rooted not in physical pain but in the emotional scars he had never been able to escape. When the doctors finally sat him down, their expressions alone told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a routine checkup, and it wasn't news he could brush aside with a shrug or a joke. They spoke carefully, choosing their words like they were stepping around broken glass, but the truth still cut him deep. For years, he had ignored the signs, the sudden blackouts, the pounding headaches, the blurred vision, the numbness that crept down his left arm, the tremors in his hands that made him feel like a stranger inside his own body. He pushed through all of it, convincing himself that fighters don't complain, champions don't slow down, legends don't get weak. But now, sitting under the harsh glow of fluorescent hospital lights, he was forced to face a reality no amount of strength could protect him from. The doctor explained the toll his body had taken, not just from the fights, but from the lifestyle, the injuries never treated properly, the concussions that piled up like silent time bombs, the nights he lied awake wrestling with memories no man should ever have to carry. They talked about neurological patterns, long-term trauma, and internal wear that had been quietly worsening for years. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. He stared at the floor, hands trembling, a lump in his throat so thick he could barely swallow. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing control, of losing his mind, his mobility, his identity. He was afraid of becoming a prisoner inside his own body. As the doctor continued, Tyson's thoughts drifted. He saw flashes of his mother, his children, his younger self, the scared boy from Brownsville who fought because it was the only way to survive. And now, as a grown man with fame, wealth, and history behind him, he felt that same helplessness creeping back. He thought about the collapse in the gym, the panic in everyone's eyes, the fear he tried so hard to hide. It was all connected. It had all been building. The doctor gently told him the truth he had never wanted to hear. The condition was serious, serious enough that continuing to push himself could lead to irreversible damage. Serious enough that one wrong fall, one wrong blow, one wrong moment could change everything. Tyson clenched his fists, not out of anger, out of heartbreak. The fighter in him wanted to scream, wanted to deny, wanted to stand up and prove he could still conquer anything. But the man in him knew this wasn't an opponent he could punch his way through. The moment with his daughter didn't happen under bright lights or in front of a camera. It happened in the quietest corner of his home, where truth has no place to hide. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, shoulders slumped, his breathing slow and uneven from another night of restless sleep. His daughter walked in softly, carrying a blanket, thinking he had simply drifted off while watching TV. But when she stepped closer, she saw the tears he had been wiping away, the ones he never wanted anyone to see. She froze in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or leave him alone, until he looked up, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it broke her heart instantly. She asked him the question no child wants to ask their parent, "Daddy, why were you crying in your sleep again?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, hands that once terrified the world. Hands that now trembled, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 memories. He tried to smile, tried to pretend it was nothing, but the truth slipped out before he could stop it. He whispered, "I get scared sometimes." She didn't understand at first. How could the man who knocked out giants be scared of anything? But then he began speaking, slowly, painfully, exposing pieces of himself he had buried for decades. He told her about the nightmares that chased him every night. Nightmares of the violence he endured as a child, the losses he never recovered from, the mistakes that still haunted him. He explained how his body sometimes felt foreign to him now, how he feared waking up one day unable to move like he used to, unable to recognize himself. His daughter listened, tears filling her eyes, realizing for the first time that her father's strength had always come wrapped in layers of hidden suffering. She placed her small hand on his arm, and the simple gesture shattered him. He broke down fully, not with screams or anger, but with the silent, shaking sobs of a man who had spent his entire life pretending he did not feel pain. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're still my hero," but the words only deepened the ache in his chest, because in that moment, he wasn't worried about legacy or fame or the world's expectations. He was worried about something far more human. The fear of not being there long enough to watch her grow. The fear that his past had stolen too much from his future. The fear that the strongest parts of him were fading faster than he could rebuild them. That moment became the most heartbreaking truth of all. Not the injuries, not the doctor's warnings, not the collapse in the gym, but the realization that behind every punch he ever threw was a man still trying to protect the child inside him. And now, looking into his daughter's eyes, he finally understood that no amount of strength could shield her from the reality he had been hiding, and no amount of fame could shield him from the fear of losing everything that truly mattered. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, not from weakness but from the weight of realizing that the battles he fought in the ring were nothing compared to the battle now unfolding inside his own body. And that moment, that devastating, soul-shaking moment, became the turning point in his story, the moment he understood that true tragedy doesn't come from losing fights, but from losing the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime trying to protect. It happened in the quietest hours of the night. That time when the world goes silent and the mind grows the loudest. He was alone in a dim room, sitting on the couch with only the flickering glow of a muted television lighting his face. His thoughts were heavy, his chest tight, his breath uneven. The fear he had tried to bury all day rose up like a wave he couldn't hold back. He grabbed his phone, not to call anyone, but simply because he felt the need to speak, to let something out before it crushed him from the inside. He opened the voicemail app, hit record, and began talking into the darkness. His voice was trembling, nothing like the tough, unbreakable tone the world associated with him. He sounded tired, truly tired, like a man who had fought too many battles and no longer knew which ones he could win. In the recording, he spoke about things he'd never dared to say publicly. The nights when he felt like his own mind was turning against him. The moments when his body didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. The fear of growing older after a lifetime of violence. The damage he felt pulsing through him like a quiet current he couldn't escape. He said memories kept coming back. Memories he thought he had defeated long ago. He spoke about guilt, regret, and the pressure of always being expected to be Iron Mike, even when all he wanted was to feel human for once. He admitted he didn't know how much longer he could carry the weight of being strong for everyone around him. At one point, his voice cracked completely. He whispered that he didn't know why the fear was hitting him so hard lately, why the nights were getting longer, why he felt so alone even with people around him. He said he wished he could go back in time, hug the little boy he used to be, and tell him he didn't have to fight so hard just to survive. There was pain in every syllable. Deep, spiritual pain that came from a life lived on the edge of brutality and tragedy. And then, in a moment that would later break the hearts of millions, he said he was tired of pretending everything was okay. He never intended for anyone to hear that message. But somehow, in a way even he didn't understand, the voicemail was leaked. Maybe he accidentally sent it. Maybe someone close to him found it. Maybe it slipped out through a sync device. But when the world heard it, they didn't hear a fighter, a champion, or an icon. They heard a man trembling beneath decades of weight. They heard the truth behind the myth. They heard a soul begging for peace in the middle of the night. And that single recording became the clearest window into the tragedy he had been living. Not one of physical defeat, but of emotional exhaustion so deep it could no longer hide in the shadows. When he finally sat down for the interview, the whole world waited. Not for entertainment, not for a comeback announcement, but for the truth he had been avoiding for years. The room was quiet, the cameras barely humming, and in front of him sat a microphone he had faced 1,000 times before, but never like this. He took a slow breath, his hands clasped, his shoulders rounded as if carrying the weight of his entire past. For a long moment, he said nothing. His lips trembled, his eyes blinked quickly, and then, like a dam cracking under pressure, he began to speak. But his voice wasn't the booming, powerful voice people knew from press conferences and fight promos. No, it was soft, fragile, almost childlike, as if he were speaking through all the broken parts of his life at once. He told them that something inside him had been slipping for years, that the collapse in the gym wasn't an accident, that the nightmares and panic weren't just stress, and that the doctor's warnings were far more serious than he ever let anyone know. His confession wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't cleaned up or polished. It wasn't built for sympathy. It was simply raw truth. Truth from a man who had run from it for decades. He spoke about the punches he took long after the crowd went home. The nights he spent sitting in the dark trying to quiet a mind that felt like a storm. The moments when fear gripped him so tightly he could barely breathe. He admitted he was scared. Not of death, but of losing himself, of becoming a shell of who he once was, of forgetting the faces of the people he loved, of losing control of his emotions, of waking up one day unable to remember the life he fought so hard to build. He talked about moments where he didn't feel like Iron Mike at all, but like a fragile piece of his younger self, frightened and trembling. And the tragic news he revealed wasn't just about his health, it was about the emotional unraveling he tried desperately to hide, the psychological battles that had grown louder with age, the pain from trauma that refused to fade, the silent damage that fame and violence had carved into his soul. As he spoke, tears slid down his face. Not dramatic, not forced, but slow and heavy, like they had been waiting years to fall. The interviewer sat frozen, the room completely still, and the audience watching across the world realized they were witnessing something rare, the collapse of a myth, the unveiling of a man. When he finished, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask for pity. He simply looked into the camera and whispered, "I'm trying," and in that moment the tragedy became clear. The real heartbreak wasn't the injuries, the fear, or the struggles. It was that one of the strongest men alive had spent his entire life convincing the world he didn't feel pain until he finally broke under the weight of carrying it alone. In the end, the truth behind his struggle wasn't found in the knockouts, the headlines, or the stories people told about him. It was found in the quiet moments he finally allowed the world to see. The pain he carried wasn't just physical, and the battles he fought weren't just inside the ring. They lived in his memories, his fears, his regrets, and the pieces of himself he spent a lifetime trying to hide. But as he opened his heart and let the truth spill out, something changed. He wasn't the monster they once feared or the myth they once worshipped. He was simply a man, scarred, flawed, exhausted, but still fighting. And in that raw honesty, the world didn't lose respect for him. It gained a deeper understanding of him. His story became more than a tale of brutality and greatness. It became a reminder that even the strongest souls crack, even legends bleed, even the strongest souls crack, even legends bleed, even warriors need healing. And now, as he steps forward into a new chapter, uncertain, humbled, but no longer hiding, he shows the world that true strength isn't measured by how hard you hit, but by how bravely you face the wounds that can't be seen.